Welcome, everyone, to the Community IT Innovators Kaleidoscope panel for NTC22. We're so happy that you decided to join us for today's webinar on diverse perspectives on thriving in nonprofit tech careers. I'm excited to be partnering with three amazing women in technology today from three different career paths who will have a conversation about building supports and finding environments where traditionally underrepresented communities can thrive in our sector. You'll be seeing them once we're done with these slides in just a moment. My name is Sarah Wolfe. I'm the sales manager at Community IT, and I will be moderating today's conversation. This is the first time I'm presenting at NTC, so I'm very excited. I use she, her pronouns and am a queer, cis, mixed Colombian American woman living in DC on Anacostan land. Today I have dark red hair and am wearing a white blouse with a black collar. My journey here has not been linear. I graduated with a BA in biology the summer of 2008 and eventually found my way into education. I spent most of the next decade teaching various science classes and to middle school and high school students. And after years of denial, I admitted I was burnt out. At a loss of where to go and what to do next, a friend pointed me in the direction of Community IT. I joined in 2018 as the account associate, and since then, I've helped found the Community IT Black Lives Matter working group and moved into sales management September of last year. Before we begin, if you're not familiar with Community IT, I just wanted to share a little bit about us. We are 100% employee owned, managed service provider. We provide outsourced IT support, and we work exclusively with nonprofit organizations, and our mission is to help nonprofits accomplish your missions through the effective use of technology. We have about 40 staff, and we started in the metropolitan DC area over 20 years ago and now serve nonprofits across the US. We're technology experts, and we are consistently named a top 500 managed service provider by Channel Futures. And that's an honor that we received again in 2021. Now that that's over and done with, I'm sure you are much more excited to hear about our learning objectives for today. My goal is for our audience to be able to use anecdotes from our panelists' personal experiences to describe organizational practices and individual behaviors that can contribute to a safer, more equitable, and more inclusive nonprofit tech industry, and identify organizational structures and individual behaviors that can create obstacles to a safer and more equitable and more inclusive nonprofit tech industry. I want to say from the outset that in our prep meetings, we've been very clear that if somebody knew exactly how to create inclusive workspaces, we'd all be doing it already. These women don't have all the answers, and during today's panel, they are interested in exploring where they personally have come from and potentially where the sector can go. Over the past few years, Community IT has been more explicitly deliberate in our attempts to create an equitable and inclusive environment for our employee owners. We haven't always gotten it right, but we are trying our best and learning from our successes and failures. One of the things I've taken away from the work I've done is having open and honest conversations can often be the best way to learn and grow as an individual and as part of a larger org. I'm not an expert in equity and inclusion, but I am excited to learn. Some of the things you hear today may be new to you or things that you've heard many times before. There's going to be overlap with a bunch of different panels, but we're hoping that this is going to be a continuation and or a start for a longer conversation. We encourage you to submit questions and comments through the chat today. We do have a couple polls that we're going to be throwing up and asking for response in the chat. We also have somebody moderating to make sure we see all of your questions. There is a bit of a lag. Since this is such a big topic, we know we can't cover everything, but you can contact me or the panelists after the webinar for a follow-up and suggestions for another panel or a next panel on diversity and inclusion in nonprofits and nonprofit tech. On that note, I would love to introduce our panelists. We wanted to gather people with a wide range of experiences since nonprofit tech is such a wide field. And I'm hoping that Sandy and everyone will join us. Excellent. So I know I've been talking nonstop for a moment, but I'd like to introduce Stefanie Cruz. She is the CEO and founder of DigiGeeks and has over 15 years of experience as a strategic communications professional. She's mobilized millions of individuals to action across national social movements, including the Women's March, Families Belong Together, and the March for Our Lives. She was one of the first digital strategists on Capitol Hill, and most recently, Steph served as the Vice President for Marketing and Digital at America's Promise Alliance. We also have Angela Kim. She is the Director of Finance and Operations at Academy of Hope in DC for the past 2 years and has had over 13 years of experience in the private and nonprofit sectors. Angela is a graduate from Columbia University of Nonprofit Management Master's Program and has served on multiple nonprofit boards. Sandy Martens serves as the Director of Information Technology at Mentor, and she has over 16 years of diverse expertise in the technology sector, including network technology, health IT, software and application development, and managing complex technology-driven projects. Sandy holds a bachelor's degree in computer graphics and new media from Johnson & Wales and will be completing her MBA program at Providence College in 2023. Steph, would you please start us off on sharing your story?
Sure. So Stefanie Cruz, so excited to be here with you all. As Sarah shared, a digital communications specialist, have been doing this work for about 15 years. I'm originally from New York and currently live in Arlington, Virginia. I started actually a poli-sci major. So Sarah, interesting how what we study versus what we end up doing. And I ended up working on Capitol Hill about 2006 before social and digital was a big thing within the political world and really helped members of Congress understand why they needed to be on Facebook and Twitter, and now I completely regret it. But here we are. But really helping people to understand the importance of online and digital tools to bridge communities together and help to close divides. After graduating from Pepperdine in California, I went to the Hill. I was on the Hill for about 7 to 10 years. When I transitioned to the nonprofit sector, I worked at AARP within their Public Policy Institute for about 2 years, and then transitioned to America's Promise, where I helped to oversee their digital and marketing work. And super excited to be here with you all and to chat more about our journeys.
All right, Angela, would you like to step in next?
Sure. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Angela Kim. I'm a 1.5 generation Korean American. I grew up in Maryland and currently also reside in Arlington, Virginia. Apparently, it's a hot spot. I today have dark brown hair and I'm wearing a light blue shirt. I don't think anybody's career is linear, not that I know of. For me, I spent the majority of my career in the corporate world. Doing sales operations with global tech firms, at VMware doing cloud computing, and MicroStrategy, a business intelligence company. I've been surrounded by a lot of smart tech folks, and I enjoyed having robust systems and resources and manpower and technology and funding all at your fingertips. And at the same time, I spent a great deal of time volunteering after hours at Boys and Girls Clubs in the greater Washington, D.C. area that I absolutely fell in love with. And with that time, I started and created a junior board, and then served on the board for a number of years to help create impact for the lovely kids that are there. And that's where I really truly developed my passion for the nonprofit mission-based work. And I came to a really pivotal decision point where I was finding myself much more inspired and motivated and happy to do the more nonprofit mission work after hours than selling more widgets at a certain point. So I came to a decision point where I had to decide, do I volunteer my time after hours? Do I donate a lot of money, or do I donate my skills and strengths directly to a nonprofit on a day-to-day basis? So I made that decision to move to the nonprofit side full time, and went through a master's program for nonprofit management, which was incredibly amazing. And in 2019, I joined Academy of Hope Adult Public Charter School in 2019, and oversee operations and finance. It's a public charter school that serves communities in Northeast and Southeast in DC, and we really focus on providing high quality adult education and services to give folks a second chance at they're earning their high school diploma and career advancement. And so now the work is much more enjoyable, and I can see where all of my hard work is going to. So excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Sandy?
Awesome. Great afternoon, everyone. For any visually impaired folks, I am a Cape Verdean woman with curly hair wearing a cream sweater. My name is Sandy Martens. I was born and raised in Boston, currently living here in Rhode Island. I've always had a fascination with technology. I enjoy how dynamic it is. I love the power of connection it has when bringing people and processes together, and the many problems and efficiencies that it solves. Similarly, that's also how I feel about project management. I've had the pleasure to begin my career within the tech industry as a project manager. In the beginning, I was really eager to learn more about it, so I joined a professional development organization by the name of OSPMI, or Ocean State Project Management Institute. After a couple of years, I was nominated to join the board and served 2 consecutive terms as the VP of Admin. And given the organization's history, it was definitely a milestone being the youngest board member, as well as the only Black woman who has served in that role. After 6 years, I officially stepped down in 2016 to focus on other things like managing many projects. And in the last 16 years, I've managed projects related to network and technology, unified communications, health IT, software application, and now as a director of IT at Mentor, I am strategically moving the organization towards efficiencies of project management and driving impactful change through technology. Now, as much as I enjoy technology, I also had to learn how to disconnect from it and create this healthy balance for my mental space. So that involves journaling, spending time with my family, being a plant mom, traveling when I can, or even being outdoors. And when I'm not doing any of that, as Sarah mentioned, I am pursuing my MBA, on track to graduate May of next year. I strongly believe with the passion that you have, it's essential to really drive that through engagement, continuous improvement, and inspiring others that are around you. So that's a little bit about me. I'm certainly excited to be here, and I appreciate you having me and these wonderful ladies here to talk about a very thought-provoking conversation.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I'm really excited to be doing this. One of the things that we wanted to do was, get an idea of who we're talking with. So if you would feel comfortable, people in the audience, please let us know how you identify. I had a poll, but I didn't realize that we can't do polls. So I would just, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, that would be greatly appreciated. We do want to make sure that we're talking about what matters to you. So while we're having that, I wanted to ask Sandy and Angela, how was the experience transitioning into the nonprofit space, both positive and negative?
Yeah, I can take that question first. For me, just reflecting about my transition and comparing the two worlds, I think the reason why I was so excited about this position and having the opportunity to lead the organization forward in the technology space was I really brought a lot of the lessons learned from being in the corporate sector as always a business user and working really, really closely with all the business analysts and engineers that were extremely smart and could literally create whatever we needed and wanted. But that's really where I learned about the basics of data analytics, data hygiene, change management, user adoption, system migrations, dashboards and reporting and analytics, and just being ultimately very data driven to learn how technology and data can really help make an organization and leadership to make better business decisions. And I always say this, my biggest lesson was always make friends with the IT folks. You always need to be on their good side. Always, always, always. And then in contrast, moving into the nonprofit sector, I have been absolutely just blown away by the drive and motivation that the nonprofit folks and staff really carry day to day when it gets really hard and the work is overwhelming, especially through this pandemic and all the things that have happened in the world in the past couple of years. The drive and the commitment to the purpose and the mission has been incredibly amazing to see in action. The commitment to family and passion, and just being surrounded by truly talented and brilliant people that are just willing to collaborate and just to create change and do good for the world and your communities. I think what has been starkly, I guess, a negative aspects is it's been definitely a change and something that I had to get used to in terms of the speed and the pace that things move. The difference in the amount of resources, time, the manpower available, or just the head count, literally, and sometimes having people understanding the value that technology can bring to an organization to make work more efficient and getting out of that, this is how we've always done it. And sometimes that just helping to educate people about there's technology sometimes to help this make it easier and more efficient and to save us more time. So that's been something that I've seen and had to learn. But I'm really happy to be in the nonprofit world and to bring all the lessons learned that I've had into this space for this organization.
As mentioned, I work for a mentor who exists to expand the mentoring movement by developing and disseminating high quality research and evidence-based practices across the US and Canada. Coming from a background strictly in corporate and moving on to nonprofit, allowed me to experience what it felt like to work with a diverse group of people. A research that I read recently mentioned that there's about 70% of white male that make up the tech industry. So seeing that shift at my organization has truly impacted my experience, definitely in a positive way. I work with many amazing women of color, men of color at Mentor. I also have the pleasure of working closely with the diverse tech team. Shout out to the in-source services tech team who supports us and really support the IT strategic vision that we put in place. Mentor, however, is a smaller organization in size, so you may have people wearing multiple hats. And there's also challenges, and I think Angela alluded to it as well with technology and the change that it can bring. So I'm getting a really good learned lesson right now on the importance of like human behavior, change management, but I'm certainly fortunate to be in this role where I'm learning to approach this area with more grace and developing creative ways to influence staff's comfort level with new or improved technology and processes.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Steph, since you sort of spent most of your life in government and then working with nonprofits, how have you navigated working with companies and in organizations that maybe, while diverse on paper, did not create a safe and inclusive space for you?
Thank you, Sarah. I think this is an interesting part of our journeys because it's different, right, at every organization that you are, because all organizations and businesses are sort of on a spectrum of how well they are helping to create safe and inclusive spaces. As you said, Sarah, if we all knew exactly how to do it, then everyone everyone ideally would be doing it. I think for myself, I found myself in some pretty difficult situations actually within the nonprofit sector, in spaces that were predominantly white or predominantly male, where I felt that my ideas weren't being heard. I felt like I was constantly fighting, which is a weird thing. I don't know if I'm the only one who feels like or has felt like you had to fight to do your job, in terms of being questioned, or not really feeling like folks believed in what I had to say. And there's a disconnect, right? Like if you hear the amazing accomplishments of the women on this panel, it's like you're incredible, you've done incredible things, you obviously know incredible things. And then all of a sudden you're sitting at a conference room table and you're like, am I crazy? Like, no, I really know what I'm talking about. But yet you find yourself in situations that where you're not really being made to feel like your ideas have value, like they are really being heard. And in those kind of situations, I think it took me really getting to a breaking point where I had to decide for myself the impact that environments that weren't safe and inclusive were having on my mental health, how they were impacting my family life, how they were impacting my career. And I kind of came to a breaking point and decided that I had to find my voice. That if people weren't going to create space for me and create space for my voice, I needed to create it for myself, and I needed to be willing to speak up for myself. And that was hard. You come up against a lot of resistance, but I had to advocate for what I felt was right. It was my way of pushing from within, to create a more inclusive environment for others as well. And there were some successes, and there were places where you weren't successful, right? So there are lead organizations that are open to that type of feedback and are willing to make changes, and organizations or individuals in leadership positions that don't want to hear it. And when I came up against really difficult situations or people in positions of leadership that were unwilling to commit to creating safer and more inclusive environments, I voted with my feet and I left. Which I think it seems like it's an easy thing, but it's actually not. It took me quite a bit of time to realize that I had agency and that I could leave and remove myself from situations that or work environments that weren't committed to creating safe and inclusive spaces. So I did eventually start my own consulting firm 3 years ago. We are the DigiGeeks Collective. We are a group of digital and communications consulting strategists that work on various projects specifically within the nonprofit sector. And I am so committed to creating the type of space that I honestly never found within the workforce or the nonprofit sector, like a space where people can be heard, a place where people feel validated and valued. It's interesting just saying it out loud because it feels like it should be common sense, but it's not. So that's been my experience and how I've navigated some of those difficult situations.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, it's really frustrating to know that that is not a unique experience. Um, Dovetailing off of that, I'd love for anybody in the audience to let us know, are you somebody who is in leadership? Are you in management? So that you can, influence hiring or and internal culture? Are you a staffer who's interested in learning what you can do at your level, or are you job seeking? I know that, Steph is a CEO and founder. Angela's, in management and a director, and as is Sandy. I wanted to, ask Steph if you could expand a little bit more and dig in to what you were talking about. What kinds of power dynamics and organizational structures make a good space for diverse and inclusive work?
Yeah, I think I spoke a little bit about voice, right, and listening. I think part of it is making sure that you are truly creating an open space where you're willing to listen. And I think the power dynamic that really important to me is the ability to share power, right? So if we're changing dynamics at the top that are contributing to environments that are not safe and not inclusive, that means you have to be willing to give something up to hear and understand that maybe you're getting something wrong, and share power with individuals within your organization at every level, from junior, mid to senior level, to take in inputs to understand how you can help to change your culture, your environment, and your structure to become a more inclusive and safer space. And there's something I think that's really important from a leadership and power dynamics as well, around your expectations around what quality leadership is, right? So I talk about quiet leadership, and the idea that inclusive, we're talking about, it's not just race, right? There's so many different ways to create safe and inclusive environments. That also means that someone who sits in a room, in a conference room, might take longer to process information. Is not necessarily the person who always shows up to speak at the first time. It doesn't mean they're not a leader. It doesn't mean that they don't have a lot to contribute, but also understanding from a power dynamic, how are we creating space for all different types of leadership levels, for all types of different ways that folks process information, how they share information. I think this expectation that we all fit within a box, or we all have to check all of these boxes to fit, it's not safe, it's not welcoming. And I think it's really a matter of leadership taking a step back, being able to examine how willing they are to hear the difficult feedback, and to have a courageous conversation that involves saying, okay, I don't have all the answers, and I'm willing to take your inputs and create actual change in how we approach things and how we lead. And again, it feels easier said than done, because otherwise we wouldn't be having this panel conversation. But I don't think it's as done as often as it should be.
Absolutely. So piggybacking off of that, Angela, what have you done as a manager to foster that culture of health and equity and inclusivity for those under your supervision?
Yeah, so I think in the last few years, I think everyone has had to deal with this in some sort of way. I don't know anyone that has been able to avoid this, right? Just with everything that's been happening in the last few years. I think at our organization at Academy of Hope, and to be honest, one of the things that really attracted me to this organization 2 years ago was that the leadership, when I just looking, you could tell it was very diverse. And from there, I was originally attracted to that. And I heard a lot about their strategic goals and plans that really had a focus on the DEI lens. So that was really, really attractive to me. But overall, I think as an organization from the top down, we really stopped and had to acknowledge the times we live in. And we had to really come to an understanding of this is what we're all dealing with. We have very challenging times. It's hard to just come in and work like everything is normal. There was a lot of pain and suffering that was happening within our families and communities that we really needed to acknowledge that there's just a lot happening at home and around the world. For me specifically, I really was trying to be very sensitive and just acknowledge. I raised my hand and I said, I really want to be very sensitive about how I bring myself to work and how I'm managing my direct reports, and say, I would like more tools and resources to make sure that I'm doing a good job and doing it justice, and that I don't have all the answers. So I started from that point. And then as a leadership team, from senior all the way down to the mid-level leadership, I mean, we really led the way in providing a space, giving people time to just openly talk whatever was on their mind that they felt comfortable sharing, and giving ourselves grace and starting things like wellness communities. We do have at our organization, because we heard loud and clear from many staff surveys that there was a huge interest in starting a DEI task force and committee. So we do have one of those here that often are always listening and taking a pulse of the organization, and then putting forth some strategies and tactics of improving how to make our organization more inclusive and more equitable. So we do have it very much ingrained in our strategic plan. Our individual team and individual goals are all inclusive of making sure we think through our objectives with a DEI lens. There's, as you can imagine, there's tons of conversation that happens. So it's very much a two-way street of making sure we're all have agency and a voice at the table to reflect. And I'll just close out with this personally for me has been a really big time for me to look inward and look at myself and our entire organization. The leadership has been absolutely loving Brene Brown's book, Dare to Lead, to really make sure, and this totally relates to the past couple of years, to help us have really, really tough conversations. That sounds like nothing, but it really has been extremely transformative for our organization when people have those bubbling feelings that they're not putting forward, or talking behind people's backs, or the meeting after the meeting and you talk behind somebody's back or whatever. Those things create a negative and perhaps even toxic environment, which could definitely relate to the DEI viewpoints. And so this piece has extremely been helpful in helping our leadership to bridge those gaps and teaching us tools, being extremely clear about what you want and setting those expectations, as someone mentioned earlier, being very vulnerable about, I make mistakes, we're all human, it's okay. And, just really making sure that we make a cultural change across our organization, starting from leadership and showing the rest of staff we are actively making efforts to change the culture here, because we have to, because people are voting with their feet and leaving, and it's just a reality. So all those things.
Yeah, absolutely. With the voting for your with your feet thing, NPR, I was listening to them a couple months ago, I think at this point, and everybody was talking about, it's the great resignation, it's the great resignation. And they really were like, no, it's not a resignation, it's a renegotiation. If you, as an organization, are willing to listen to what your staff are saying and, go to them and meet them where they are, but listen and do what they need, give them what they need to be able to succeed, that they will stay. And so, with that, I know that one of the things that has been also very prevalent has been self-care. And I want to do another shout out to the coffee talk this morning, because I felt like I was like, did you guys just take my agenda and do the thing? But everybody's talking, it's great. They had a lot of really great ideas on this, but and people in chat, please, you've been great sharing and making comments. I'd love to hear from you, and also from Sandy. Not all self-care is bubble baths. What do you do for self-care professionally to make sure that both you and your staffers, like Jethro, can succeed?
Absolutely. I love this question. So there's a few things that I consider for practicing professional self-care. Number one, and Jethro can probably attest to this, that I'm really big on organizing and managing my time. There's a quote that I look at every morning as I start my day that says, for every minute spent organizing, an hour is earned. So the things that I do to earn my hour back or to manage my time effectively is that at the end of every week, I check my calendar to the following week to ensure what it's looking like. Is it a really meeting heavy week? Is it involving a lot of internal conversations, external conversations? And based on that, I kind of do my best to really fit in blocks of time where I have a break or catch up, or for that matter, just have a moment to kind of switch gears in between meetings. I also feel the need that, based on the workload that's going on, to ask the meeting owners if I'm needed at the meeting. A lot of times you're just thrown into meetings just because. So if this is an area where I can come up to speed based on some meeting minutes or notes, I'd rather do that than have to sit in within that hour time frame. But of course, if you don't ask, you don't know. I also do my best to stick to my rituals, stick to my yoga rituals, meditation. And for about 30 minutes to an hour of every morning, I check out my day to ensure where I'm going, to really organize my day accordingly. And that's something that my organization does, is that they really support focus time, or DNS, or do not schedule timeframes, which are usually 2 to 3 hour blocks that they put on our calendars. And it's meant for us to really focus and complete our deliverables. Something else that I do honor in our practice is mental health days off. And I just want to preface this to say that, if you have vacation time or personal time, and depending on your organization's policy, to not feel guilty about using that time for a mental break. I remember really early on in my career, I used to feel so guilty for even the thought or the idea of taking a day off, because, I needed to work hard. I needed to show that I'm dedicated. But really over time, I was actually burning myself out, which meant that I wasn't working to my best ability. So it took, a few years for me to recognize the importance of having that healthy balance between work and self-care, definitely for the sake of my sanity, for my health, as well as my team members. So I would ensure to really take the break when I needed it. And lastly, if you're not happy doing what you're doing, or for that matter, being in an environment, then do what you need to do to find the next journey in your career. I think that a lot of times too, people feel very complacent or comfortable where they are, and they're afraid of taking that next step or that next jump in their career. I always say to myself that I have a expiration date when I join an organization. Usually it's like 4 to 5 years, where, the first 2 years I'm really getting to learn the culture, really to understand everyone. And then by year 3, 4, 5, that's where I really envision myself to see the long term in here. How is the growth rate at the organization? Do I see myself growing within the organization too? Are there a lot of opportunity for me to grow? And again, I go back to the culture of it. If it's not conducive or healthy as well, there's plenty of opportunities out there. You should never feel like you're stuck or you need to stay there. Do what we need to do to gain happiness and make that step forward to really move forward with your journey.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. Just have Angela, with building with that, all those great ideas of like planning and that building off that 5 years, what advice would you give to a junior staff member or somebody who's really in that first part of their career in nonprofit IT?
Yeah, I was extremely fortunate to make a lot of mistakes in my early career on my own. And I, as a 1.5 first generation Korean American, my parents did not ever work in the corporate world. I had none of that to lean on. So I made a lot of mistakes and did the best that I could. So I try very intentionally to pass on those things to my team to help them learn these things as I tell them. Of course, you always learn better when you go through that yourself, but I try to pass on those lessons learned. I think the biggest mistake that I made early in my career is, and I really remember this very early on in tech actually, I thought it was the responsibility and job of my manager to look out for my professional career growth. And I distinctly remember at a performance review, I said, why did my manager not come up with professional goals for me? Why didn't they focus on that? And some organizations, do we all do performance reviews and work through that throughout the year? No, obviously not every organization does that. So I think that was my biggest lesson learned, is make sure that you take control of your own career growth and professional development. Think through where you want to be in 5-10 years. Do you want your boss's job? How do they get there? What skills are needed? Look at their job description. What's the delta? Where are your gaps and how do you get there? And really make sure you have a very intentional plan, whether it's at work and they have professional development tools and training and resources and funds available, or maybe you do that on your own time outside and you take courses, or maybe you get with a mentor. I'm a huge proponent of mentoring. It's never too late. You're never too old to have a mentor. I actually suggested to my team this year to have a mentor that will help them in the specific areas that they really want to improve on. Public speaking, or maybe speaking up more, project management, whatever that might be. Or they want to become an entrepreneur, so they want to gain more skills there. they are pairing themselves with the appropriate person to manage that time with that mentor on their own. And I really think, and what I've also started to do is to actually have quarterly performance reviews together with me. That is not required by the organization. We only have annual, but we do a quarterly review to talk about how they're doing, any corrections made or improvements they can make or that I can make to help them develop and grow. All of that is extremely important that we do at our organization. And I really take time to help teach them tools. I've learned a lot of things on the job in my career, so I try to pass that on. Things like Excel, tools and tricks, a pivot table, a VLOOKUP. I learned way early on, never stopped using that. So I continue to try to pass that knowledge along. Additionally, what I would say is to be very clear about what you want and what you're looking for. If your goal in the next 5-10 years down the road is to become a CTO or a CIO of an organization, make that very clear and have that conversation with your manager or leadership and say, this is where I want to go. Can you help me devise a plan to get there in the next 1 to 2, 3, whatever years? And it'll be very interesting when you put it out into the world and you tell people what you want. The opportunities somehow seem to appear your way because you've told people and they remember when you said, oh, I want to be a CIO or whatever, that they do remember you the next time something pops up. It's been incredible in that way. That's actually how I got this job. It came up on my radar because I was being very intentional about what I was looking for. In addition, in terms of what we've mentioned earlier, giving people voice and agency, I really, really underscore with my team to ask for help and ask for guidance early if you don't know what to do or you don't know how to go about something. Instead of wasting your time sitting with something, or if you don't understand clearly what's expected, make sure you ask those questions early on versus when it's too late and the deliverable is due. We've learned as an organization, clear is kind. This comes straight from the Brene Brown book, Dare to Lead. This has been transformational for us because I was thinking in certain situations, I was delegating and I would tell somebody, go do X. And then come time when I was looking for an update, they hadn't completed what I expected. I learned because I was not being clear exactly what I thought done looked like. And that's been extremely important. When I said, go operationalize this policy, in my head, actually, that I did not verbalize, I actually was thinking about a procedure, a policy, and communication plan, but I had never verbalized that. And that was my error. I think the last two things I would say is be vulnerable with your team and model that. The first thing is the leader should show that they can be vulnerable and show that when they are human, that we all make mistakes. So if you make a mistake, it's completely fine. You're not going to be penalized for it. We learn from this and move on. And the last thing I would say is empower them to have agency and let them know. I have had certain instances where folks didn't feel like they had authority nor agency, and I had to, as their manager, help facilitate that. And for example, in a setting or a group meeting, say that this person will be the lead and will be responsible for A, B, and C. And that's been helpful as well.
No, absolutely. And I love how there's a lot of suggestions coming in from chat that are absolutely dovetailing in really well with all of those and all of those items. Chat, please feel free to add in and put in any questions into your chat. We do have a little bit of time for Q&A. Our goal was to make sure that we had some organizational practices and individual behaviors that can, promote a safer, equitable, and more inclusive nonprofit tech industry, sort of as a roundup before, anybody who has Q&A, if there's any questions that come in. I'd love to do a round robin, just each of you. What investments should leadership in nonprofits make to bring in and retain historically underrepresented staff? And I don't know, we can also do a small versus large nonprofits sort of thing in that. I don't know, whoever wants to, Steph, do you want to go first? I keep on picking on you first.
Sure. So I think it's interesting when you think about bringing in and retaining. I feel like we think about the external process of bringing people to the organization. And I really have been thinking a lot about what an organization needs to do within to create the space so that when someone arrives, that they can stay, that they feel valued, that they feel seen, and that they can effectively contribute to the organization. And so for me, I think that means actual training around diversity, equity, and inclusion for staff at every level, from leadership, mid-management, and junior level, so that folks can understand and be aware of their own biases, of how they show up in conversations. I think to Angela's point, this impacts, performance reviews, how we engage in meetings, but really creating that training and awareness and learning. It has to happen, because we can't just say that we are creating a diverse and equitable environment because we are hiring 5 new people of color. What are we doing within the organization to create a culture that can really create a space for all of us to really understand how to work together and work together in a way that's very effective? So I think that's definitely something that I would say is important. And then the point that this is not it's not one time. You don't have someone come in and do diversity and inclusion for your organization one time to make you a more diverse and inclusive organization. There's staff turnover, there's organizational policies that shift. This is an ongoing effort. And the organization needs to be committed and continue to do the work daily to successfully create this type of environment.
I'll jump in on this one too.
Yeah.
So there's 2 things that I would recommend for areas of investment that leadership should consider to bring in and retain historically underrepresented staff. One, and I think, Angela, you mentioned it earlier, workplace mentoring. A research done by Conboy and Kelly says that organizations with mentoring programs has shown that it improves promotion and retention of diverse groups, increasing that for the rate of men and women by 15 to 38% compared to organizations that don't have mentored or workplaces. At Mentor, our organization, we have a senior director of systems innovation by the name of Charlene, who builds partnerships with companies and workforce development agencies to maximize quality mentoring in the workplace. So I'm definitely glad to share more information, or for that matter, drop in a link on how folks can learn more, or for that matter, develop mentoring workplaces at their organization. The other investment leadership should consider to create an inclusive, to do this is create an inclusive hiring process, which actively recognizes diversity and embraces a wide range of qualities that candidates may bring to the organization. Of course, there's many advantages to that, such as the company's reputation, which in return attracts and retains the talent. I read a research on monster.com where it said that 86% of candidates globally say DEI in the workplace is important to them. And then additionally, 62% of those folks would turn down a job offer if it came from a culture that didn't support diverse workforce. I think that the year 2020 was a real wake-up call for many organizations, where they recognize what we, the underrepresented people, have always known about racial injustice and inequality. So for leadership, really investing the time and having a thoughtful approach to inclusive hiring, I think is certainly important to consider.
Absolutely.
Yeah, 100% agree with everything that's been mentioned. So I don't want to repeat that. To add on, we at our organization at Academy of Hope, we do hire first or post positions internally, and then we give our internal staff an opportunity to apply, and then we also post externally. I know our HR team has definitely made a great deal of effort to be a lot more inclusive and equitable. And we recently did a compensation equity assessment to look at our local markets and industry benchmarks to make sure our compensation, that there weren't any disparities there. I think everyone has mentioned the professional development. I would imagine most companies, or I hope most companies and organizations have professional development dollars. Use them. Absolutely use them, and it should be very intentional and strategic. We also have a new hire buddy system internally for staff that started our organization, so that you have somebody outside of your team that connects you with the organization to get a lay of the land, understand the culture, understanding where you fit inside the organization, and just to have a sounding board is always important. And then we always, or in our team, we talk a lot about how to manage up and also manage sideways to really help people be successful and grow and develop here. So that's something that our team talks about quite a bit as well.
Oh, those are all really amazing. We do have a question that came in from chat. What are some of the challenges that you face when trying to address with leadership glaring issues that are affecting the organization? I don't know who wants to jump in on that one.
I feel like for me, it's how do I convey that clearly to them regarding the challenge that I'm having, and whether they are in support of what I am sharing with them. Because a lot of times, too, depending on who the leadership or the role that they have, they could either be very vulnerable and understanding of the situation, or at times they could just use their role or position to, kind of dumb down the situation and not really support in that aspect. So I try to understand, like, how can I really clearly and effectively try to share out that what I'm thinking about, or for that matter, the issues that I'm experiencing, in hopes that they would be able to, be there to support and guide me through it.
I think for our organization, we actually just recently went through something that caused a major cultural shift for us. And the way that we went about it, tackling that, was we realized that there were murmurings happening, and we needed to address that at the leadership level. And we really focused on providing staff with a safe place and space to talk about whatever they were feeling. So we did have a staff, this is very old school. We had a staff comment box, and also folks were able to email in and anonymously, so they felt protected and safe. And those were all read by senior leadership, were sorted through, and the senior leadership team actually held a town hall to talk about those things. It was a very tough conversation. Like I said earlier, we had a lot of very, very tough conversations, and it needed to be said. We gave folks the space and time to talk about those things. And then, importantly, we then came back to everyone to say, we hear you, we acknowledge your concerns, and now we are putting these, we're creating a plan around it to improve and to tackle and resolve. So we were being very intentional about showing folks that we're listening and we're acting upon that.
Excellent. Yeah. So we do have about 5 minutes left. There aren't any other Q&As on. I do have a couple of slides to share. Just sort of summarizing what we've been talking about. If we could get that up on screen. So, really in summary, making sure that organizations are valuing their time, staff, and opinions, creating, work-life boundaries, stick to them, create space to listen. And, there are people who are probably also very bad at asking for what they need. So, like we mentioned earlier, model asking for help, scaffold in, build in, get those people used to saying what they need. Invest in your staff, provide quality benefits, and establish a culture of actually using them. PTO is not there to just languish away. Use it. Make sure people are taking vacations. Allocate funds and time for professional development. Make sure that managers know that they are expected to invest time and effort into developing junior staff. And, creating and fostering an open community, making sure that you can have those conversations, like Angela said, about, learning how to communicate with each other about tough concepts. If, bringing up a way to, flag a microaggression without necessarily having to stop a conversation the entire, stop dead, and mentoring. This is just the beginning of this wonderful conversation, and people have been working towards this for years and years, and cultural shifts take a really long time, and we always have to revisit them. There's a collaborative notes page in Google. I failed to focus on that at the beginning of the presentation, but there is a collaborative notes Google Doc, and if I'm going to be pulling some of these suggestions, if people haven't put them in there already. We also put a link to a bunch of resources, including the book that we've been mentioning a couple of times, Dare to Lead, as well as her podcast. I am wondering if my computer will finally switch us over or not, but yay, technology. There are a whole host of other things. There's a link to a mentoring.org, why workplace mentoring matters, PDF, a couple different online resources, and podcasts. HBR Women at Work. There was a podcast about leading with authenticity, and lots of different really great resources. Please feel free to add your resources into chat, add them into the collaborative notes. And I just want to say that this has been a really wonderful time talking with everyone. And I want to thank, Steph and Angela and Sandy. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me and being able to share with us. I've put your organization websites and your LinkedIn's. Everyone, please feel free to reach out to us to continue the conversation. And I know that we are pretty much at time, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.